for a long time I've been really interested in elements that belong to more than one category. So for example, one element which could be making a sound, but that could have a visual aspect or quality to it as well. And then looking for a point where both merge together, so you don't really think of the event as being visual or being sounding, but it's really both. It's an integration of these two parameters. And it's very difficult to say when this particular way of thinking started, but already in a piece like Inside, Outside, In from 2001, so 17 years ago, I started being concerned with the movements of the playing, not as much as I was concerned with the sounds, but at least I started thinking, this is actually interesting if things also get motivated by the choreography, not just by the sound. And since then, in each piece that would pick up until the point where almost the visual or the movement or the performative aspects took over. And maybe it didn't take over, but at least it became to have just as important role as the sound. Without putting the sound in the background, really. Sound is really super important, but so is the performative aspect, and hopefully it can come together. Whenever people ask me about direct influences or inspirations, it's very difficult for me because I don't think I get influenced directly, but I think I get very much influenced indirectly, or even sometimes negatively. Like if I see one thing, that may be the inspiration to do the opposite. But the direct inspiration, I'm not sure if I believe in it. At least I'm not so conscious about it. But one thing that was, two things that were very important, or even three things. Probably I could go on with the list, but if I start from one beginning, I think the main experience for a Scandinavian person or a European person to move outside of Europe and suddenly see Europe from afar, and thus only in that moment realizing what Europe is, and what binds it together, and what is the difference to something else. Because I really found that also just in the way that people would talk about music or think about music or compose was really a different, another world, another way of logic, another way of reasoning, another way of thinking. Introducing what I still today think of as a kind of poetic logic that I had never met in before I came here. And then, of course, I came in 2003. It was a very intense moment. Lots of actions in the street, and piqueteros and people hammering the banks. I don't know if they still do, but a very high energy level. And sometimes when I came from my 8th floor flat and down on the street level, it was like just being met by, well, it was also 35 degrees, 40 degrees hot, just being met by the heat and this extreme level of energy that just kind of flushed me down the street. And I was just a part of this very intense moment, and then until I came back up in my flat and I only had the noise of the city in the background, as if I was all the time sitting on a ship with the motor running in the background. Musically, I was very fascinated, and that was also the reason that I found my way to contact Gabriel Valverde, who I was studying with at that time, and we were having a lot of exchange and conversations and sessions where we would meet and just talk about music. But what I was very fascinated by in his music was the extended use of silences, and as well the pure silences, but also the silences with a little bit of color. And that kind of changed my perspective in a way that I think can definitely be found in traces elsewhere in my music. Sometimes I compose actively with background noise for the sole reason of, at some point, removing the background noise so you suddenly get aware of it. So this different approach to a silence, that it doesn't have to be a pause, but it can be a musical state or a musical element with its own poetry, energy, and so on. Maybe that's the most specific I can get about influence from Argentina and my stay in 2003 and 2004. Well, I am very excited to be here, and it's a festival with a lot of activities. Also, I'm meeting with younger composers, having sessions with them and exchange, and there'll be workshops going on with different international ensembles and musicians. And then we will be working intensely on the Latin American premiere of Black Box Music, which is a piece for large ensembles sitting around the space. And I just saw the space, and I think it's really going to be a perfect space for this piece. And the audience sits inside of the ensemble or the orchestra, as if you're part of the orchestra, and they look at some very big hands of a conductor. So in a way, it's a normal orchestra situation turned around. So you're in the orchestra looking at the conductor who starts conducting, but then things start to happen. You think he's in control, and he is, but the relationship between what the conductor does and how the ensemble reacts starts changing, and it goes upside down until you have the moment where it's more like a hand choreography accompanied by the ensemble. And everything is taking place inside this black box, hence the name. And later the hands also start producing sounds with all kinds of objects, and even starts building some kind of installation or musical machine. And then I'm not going to say anymore. But it's a very big piece, and it's an interesting piece to work on, because each time it turns out slightly differently, because there's so much material where we workshop the sounds. We look for if a particular sound does not come natural to the musician, maybe we look for a different sound to get that particular energy. So there's a certain flexibility in the piece so that we can look for sounds that really fit with the musicians. And so it sounds a little bit different each time. And then it's the second performance with the young, brilliant soloist Roberto Maqueda. And I'm looking very much forward to working with him again and his hands. We are doing another concert, Roberto and I. We call it Runtime Era. Has taken the name from a performance I do with joysticks, where I'm controlling myself running around in various spaces, turning the space into the instrument and playing around with time. It's a little bit difficult to explain, but I promise it's going to be cool. And then we're doing at least two other performative works. Roberto, who is a percussion player, is going to play the cello, among other things, in a piece which is really just as much a choreography, with the video projected onto himself. So he has two bows, four hands, two celli, and all the possibilities of visual games and visual illusions that you can create out of this. And so that shall be interesting as well, and I'm looking very much forward to present all these pieces finally in Argentina, La Plata.